The ATM card was worn at the edges, barely readable after sitting in my wallet for 23 years. My mother had pressed it into my palm the week before she died, her frail fingers trembling against mine. "Promise me you'll only use this when you truly have nothing left," she'd whispered. I'd promised, never imagining I'd actually need it. But standing outside the Bank of America on Harrison Street with $47 to my name and nowhere to sleep, I finally slid that card into the machine. What happened next made the branch manager sprint out of his office, his face white as printer paper. "Sir, please don't move," he said, his voice cracking. "I need you to come inside immediately. This account... Oh my God, this can't be right." My name is Nathan Pierce. I'm 45 years old, and 72 hours ago, my wife Victoria threw me out of our Riverside mansion like I was yesterday's trash. She kept everything. The house I'd helped buy, the cars, the investment accounts, even the dog I'd rescued as a puppy. Her lawyer, Preston Manning, had smiled at me across that mahogany conference table like a shark smelling blood. "Mr. Pierce, given that all assets were purchased during the marriage with Mrs. Pierce's income, and considering your minimal financial contributions over the years, you'll be leaving with exactly what you brought into this marriage. Nothing." Victoria had sat there in her Chanel suit, checking her phone while my life was dismantled. 15 years of marriage reduced to a stack of papers I signed with shaking hands because I couldn't afford to fight. My teaching salary had gone toward our lifestyle, sure, but her tech executive income had paid for the big stuff. In California's community property laws, the one who makes more usually wins. And I'd lost spectacularly. But that morning at the ATM, everything changed. And what I discovered about my mother, about my family, and about the woman I'd married would turn my entire world inside out. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. Your support means everything, and I read every single comment. Now, let's continue with what happened next. 3 days earlier, I'd been sitting in our home office, helping Victoria prepare for her quarterly investor presentation. That's what I did: support her career, edit her slides, make sure she had everything she needed. I taught high school English for 28 years, came home every day to a wife who made 10 times my salary and never let me forget it. "Nathan, can you be useful and grab my laptop charger?" Victoria had said without looking up from her phone. Not honey or babe, just Nathan, like I was the hired help. I'd walked into our bedroom, and that's when I saw them. Divorce papers, neatly arranged on my pillow like some twisted turn-down service. My heart stopped. Victoria appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, looking irritated that I'd found them before she was ready. "We need to talk," she said, like she was scheduling a dentist appointment. "Vic, what is this?" "It's exactly what it looks like. I'm filing for divorce. Preston has everything ready. You just need to sign." I sat down on the edge of our bed, the bed where we'd slept together for 15 years, and tried to process what was happening. "Why? What did I do wrong?" Victoria laughed, actually laughed. "You haven't done anything wrong, Nathan. You're just insufficient. I'm 42 years old, running a tech company worth $200 million, and I'm married to a high school teacher who thinks a night out means Olive Garden. Do you understand how embarrassing that is? I thought we were happy. You thought wrong. I've been unhappy for years. I just finally got tired of pretending." She checked her watch, a Cartier I'd saved for 3 months to buy her for our 10th anniversary. "Preston's waiting in his office. Let's get this over with." The meeting was brutal. Preston Manning specialized in high-asset divorces for wealthy clients who wanted to crush their soon-to-be ex-spouses. He'd prepared Victoria's case with surgical precision. All marital assets were purchased primarily with Mrs. Pierce's income, Preston explained, sliding documents across the table. The house, purchased 12 years ago, down payment entirely from Mrs. Pierce's bonus. The investment accounts, funded entirely by Mrs. Pierce. The vehicles, Mrs. Pierce. The vacation property in Lake Tahoe, Mrs. Pierce. "But California is a community property state," I said, my voice sounding weak even to my own ears. "Don't I get half?" Preston smiled like I'd just told a joke. "In theory, yes. but Mrs. Pierce is willing to be generous. She'll give you $50,000 as a settlement, provided you sign today and waive all future claims to her assets and income. $50,000. 15 years of marriage boiled down to less than $3,500 per year. That's insane, I said, looking at Victoria. Vic, tell them this is insane. She was reading something on her phone, not even listening. Just sign, Nathan. Preston has another appointment at 4. I need time to get my own lawyer. Preston leaned forward, his voice dropping to something that wasn't quite a threat, but felt like one anyway. Mr. Pierce, let me be clear. If you force Mrs. Pierce to take this to trial, we will bury you. We'll prove that your financial contributions to this marriage were negligible. We'll bring in witnesses who will testify about your lack of ambition, your contentment with mediocrity. By the time we're done, you'll leave with nothing except debt from your legal fees. The $50,000 offer expires when you walk out of this room. I looked at Victoria one more time, hoping to see some trace of the woman I'd fallen in love with at a coffee shop 16 years ago. The graduate student who'd told me she admired teachers because they changed lives for something more valuable than money. But that woman was gone, if she'd ever existed at all. I signed every page without reading them. Smart choice, Preston said, sliding me a check. Mrs. Pierce has arranged for a hotel room for you through the end of the week. After that, you're on your own. Victoria stood up, smoothing her skirt. I've packed some of your clothes. They're in the garage. My security code has been changed, so don't try to come back to the house. Preston will handle everything else. She walked out without looking back. 15 years, and she couldn't even say goodbye. The hotel Preston had booked was a Motel 6 off the highway, the kind of place where the ice machine was broken and the walls were thin enough to hear every conversation in adjacent rooms. I spent 3 days there in a fog, eating vending machine food and staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how my life had imploded so completely. The $50,000 check sat on the nightstand, mocking me. It seemed like a fortune and nothing at all at the same time. In Riverside, California, that wouldn't even cover a year's rent for a decent apartment. I'd need first month, last month, security deposit, furniture, and God knows what else. On the third day, I finally dragged myself to the bank to deposit the check and start figuring out my next move. That's when I remembered my mother's card. Eleanor Pierce had died 23 years ago, back when I was fresh out of college and still believed the world was full of possibilities. She'd been a quiet woman, my mom, working as a bookkeeper for small businesses around town. We'd never had much money. She drove a 15-year-old Honda, clipped coupons, bought clothes from thrift stores. But she was generous with what little she had, always helping neighbors who needed it, always finding money for my school supplies or books I wanted. The week before she died, cancer having eaten away everything except her spirit, she'd called me to her bedside. "Nathan, I need you to promise me something," she'd said, her voice barely a whisper. "Anything, Mom." She'd pulled a bank card from her nightstand drawer and pressed it into my hand. "This is from an account I set up years ago. The PIN is your birthday, month and day. Promise me you'll only use it when you truly have nothing left, when you're at your absolute lowest point and need help." I'd promised, confused but not wanting to upset her. "Mom, what account? What money?" "You'll understand when the time comes. Just promise me." "I promise." She'd died 2 days later. I'd put the card in my wallet and forgotten about it, assuming it was maybe a small savings account with a couple $1,000s she'd managed to set aside. I'd never checked. It felt wrong somehow, like I'd be admitting I needed my dead mother's help. But standing outside that Bank of America on Harrison Street with literally nothing left, I finally pulled out that worn ATM card. The magnetic strip was barely readable after 23 years in my wallet. I slid it into the machine, half expecting it to be rejected. "Please enter your PIN." I typed 0724, my birthday, July 24th. The machine whirred for longer than normal, like it was thinking hard about something. The screen went blank. Then it flashed. "Please see a banker immediately." My stomach dropped. Great. The account was probably closed or flagged for fraud or something. 23 years was a long time. Of course it wouldn't work. I was about to walk away when the bank's front door burst open. A man in a suit, probably mid-50s, with his name tag reading Douglas Chen, branch manager, practically ran toward me. "Sir," he said, breathing hard like he'd sprinted across the building. "Sir, please don't move. I need you to come inside immediately." "Is there a problem?" His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly. "The account you just accessed. I need to verify something. Please, it's urgent." I followed him inside, confused and increasingly worried. Had my mother somehow been involved in something illegal? Was this account tied to fraud? Douglas led me past the teller windows to a private office in the back. He gestured for me to sit, then closed the door and pulled up something on his computer. His fingers were literally shaking as he typed. "Sir, can I see some identification?" I handed him my driver's license. He compared it to something on his screen, then looked at me like I was a ghost. "Mr. Pierce, when was the last time you accessed this account?" "Never. My mother gave me the card 23 years ago, right before she died. I've never used it." Douglas sat back in his chair, running his hand through his hair. "Mr. Pierce, the account you just tried to access, the balance is $47.3 million. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually laughed because it was so absurd. "That's impossible. My mother was a bookkeeper. She drove a 15-year-old car. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment my entire childhood." "The account was opened in 1985, Douglas continued, his voice still shaky. "The original deposit was $50,000. It's been sitting here untouched for 40 years, accumulating compound interest. But that's not what makes this extraordinary." He turned his computer screen toward me. I saw a document with my mother's name, Eleanor Marie Pierce, at the top. "Your mother wasn't just a bookkeeper, Mr. Pierce. According to these documents, she was the primary shareholder of something called Sterling Financial Holdings. Does that name mean anything to you?" I shook my head, feeling like I was in a dream. Douglas pulled up another document. Sterling Financial Holdings was a venture capital firm founded in 1980. It made early investments in several technology companies that went on to become industry giants: Microsoft, Apple, Oracle. Your mother's $50,000 initial investment grew exponentially. That can't be right. My mom never mentioned any of this. According to these notes, she specifically instructed that you not be told about the account until you accessed it. There's a letter here that was supposed to be given to you. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope that looked like it had been sitting there for decades. My mother's handwriting on the front. "For Nathan, when he needs it most." My hands were shaking as I opened it. The paper inside was yellowed with age, but the words were clear. "My dearest Nathan, if you're reading this, it means you've finally used the card. It means you've hit bottom, and I'm sorry I'm not there to help you through it. But maybe, in a way, I am. You're probably confused about the money. Let me explain. When I was 25 years old, I worked as a bookkeeper for a small startup called Sterling Financial. The founder, James Sterling, couldn't afford to pay me much, so he offered me shares in the company instead. I had no idea what that meant, but I needed the job, so I accepted. Those shares became worth millions when the company's investments paid off. I could have lived like a queen, Nathan, but I chose not to. I watched too many people I knew destroy their lives with sudden wealth. I watched families torn apart by money, by greed, by people who loved dollars more than each other. So I made a choice. I would live simply, work hard, and save everything for you, for the moment when you really needed it. Not for fun or luxury, but for survival. For a second chance. I set up this account with specific instructions. You could only access it when you had nothing else, when you were at your lowest point. Because that's when money matters most, not when you're comfortable, but when you're desperate. The amount in this account is yours, completely and legally. No taxes, no restrictions. It's been sitting here waiting for you to need it. And if you're reading this letter, that time has come. Use it wisely, my son. Not to buy things, but to build something. To start over. To become the man I always knew you could be. I love you more than all the money in the world. Mom. I sat there in Douglas Chen's office, tears streaming down my face, holding a letter from a mother who'd been dead for 23 years, but had somehow known exactly when I'd need her. "Mr. Pierce," Douglas said quietly, "what would you like to do?" What would I like to do? I thought about Victoria, sitting in our mansion, probably celebrating being rid of her insufficient husband. I thought about Preston Manning, who'd made me feel like worthless garbage. I thought about the $50,000 check in my pocket that was supposed to be my entire compensation for 15 years of marriage. And I started to laugh. "Mr. Pierce?" Douglas looked worried, like I was having a breakdown. "I need to make some phone calls," I said, wiping my eyes. "And I need to hire the best lawyer in California." The expression on Victoria's face when Preston Manning called her 3 days later was apparently something for the history books. I know because her assistant Melissa, who I'd always been kind to, and who'd always thought Victoria was a monster, sent me a text about it. She threw her phone across the room and screamed for 5 minutes. "Preston looks terrified. What did you do?" What I'd done was hire Catherine Morrison, the lawyer who'd made a career out of demolishing Preston Manning in court. She cost $850 an hour, and she was worth every penny. "Mr. Pierce," Catherine had said during our first meeting, "you signed away your rights to the marital assets. That's going to be difficult to overcome." "I signed under duress," I explained. "I was given less than 24 hours to decide, threatened with financial ruin if I didn't accept, and explicitly told I couldn't consult with my own attorney." Catherine smiled. "That's coercion, and the settlement amount is unconscionable. $50,000 for a 15-year marriage where you contributed your entire income toward household expenses? A first-year law student could overturn that." She filed an emergency motion to set aside the divorce settlement based on coercion, unconscionability, and failure to provide adequate financial disclosure. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, I used some of my mother's gift to secure an apartment in a nice part of town, not a mansion, but a clean, modern place with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the mountains. I bought furniture, real furniture, not the expensive designer pieces Victoria had insisted on, but comfortable things that actually suited me. I also started making calls to people I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Old friends from college who Victoria had deemed beneath us. My brother David, who I'd barely spoken to in 5 years because Victoria found him embarrassing. They all welcomed me back like I'd been released from prison. "Nathan, I have to tell you," David said over beers one evening. "We all saw what she was doing to you. You just seem to shrink smaller and smaller every year. It's good to see you standing up straight again." The court hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I wore a suit I'd bought myself, not expensive, but clean and professional. Victoria showed up in full corporate warrior mode, Armani suit, Louboutin heels, Preston Manning at her side looking less confident than usual. Judge Rachel Steinberg presided, a woman in her 60s with a reputation for zero tolerance for legal bullying. "I've reviewed the motion and the original settlement agreement," Judge Steinberg began. "Mr. Manning, would you like to explain why your client offered Mr. Pierce only $50,000 for a 15-year marriage?" Preston stood up, smoothing his tie. "Your Honor, the settlement reflected the relative financial contributions to the marriage. Mrs. Pierce earned significantly more, and—" "I can read, Mr. Manning," Judge Steinberg interrupted. "What concerns me is the timeline. Mr. Pierce was given less than 24 hours to accept or reject the offer, explicitly told he couldn't consult with his own attorney, and threatened with financial ruin if he proceeded to trial. Does that sound like good faith negotiation to you?" Preston shifted uncomfortably. "We were trying to expedite the process, Your Honor." "You were trying to coerce a settlement," the judge corrected. "Ms. Morrison, your motion to set aside the agreement is granted. We're going to trial to determine proper asset division." Victoria's face went red. She leaned over to whisper something to Preston, who shook his head and whispered back. She stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, I'd like to speak." Judge Steinberg raised an eyebrow. "This is highly irregular, Mrs. Pierce." "I understand, but this is my marriage and my money. I have a right to be heard." The judge gestured for her to proceed. Victoria turned to face me, her expression a mixture of fury and disbelief. "Nathan, what are you doing? You accepted the settlement. You signed the papers. You can't just decide you want more money now because you're having regrets." I stood up and Catherine put a hand on my arm, but I gently removed it. "Your Honor, may I respond?" Judge Steinberg nodded. I looked at Victoria, really looked at her, and felt nothing. No anger, no love, no resentment. Just nothing. "Vic, I'm not doing this because I want your money. I'm doing this because what you did was wrong." You bullied me into accepting an unfair settlement because you thought I was weak and had no other options. You treated me like I was worthless because I didn't make as much money as you. But my mother left me a gift, not because I deserved it, but because she loved me. And that gift gave me something you tried to take away. Options. Victoria's eyes narrowed. What gift? An inheritance, I said simply. Enough that I don't need your $50,000. Enough that I can afford the best lawyers and fight this in court for as long as it takes. Preston Manning stood up quickly. Your Honor, Mr. Pierce's newly discovered wealth is irrelevant to the division of marital assets. Actually, Mr. Manning, Catherine said, standing as well, it's extremely relevant. It proves that your threats of financial ruin were empty. My client isn't fighting for survival anymore. He's fighting for principle. Judge Steinberg was watching the exchange with obvious interest. This case is going to trial. I'm ordering both parties to submit complete financial disclosure, including any assets acquired before, during, or after the marriage. We'll reconvene in 60 days. The trial lasted 3 weeks, and it was magnificent. Catherine Morrison tore apart every argument Preston Manning made. She brought in witnesses who testified about my contributions to Victoria's career, the dinners I'd hosted for her clients, the presentations I'd edited, the household I'd managed so she could focus on work. She brought in financial experts who testified that $50,000 for 15 years was unconscionable and punitive. She brought in therapists who testified about the psychological effects of coercive negotiation tactics. Preston fought hard, but he was outmatched. Catherine was ruthless and prepared. The day of the verdict, the courtroom was packed. Judge Steinberg read her decision with no preamble. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, this court finds that the original settlement agreement was unconscionable and obtained through coercion. The court orders the following division of assets: the marital home to be sold and proceeds split 50-50. All investment accounts split 50-50. All vehicles to be sold and proceeds split 50-50. Mrs. Pierce will pay Mr. Pierce $450,000 in spousal support to equalize the settlement. Case closed. Victoria looked like she'd been slapped. $450,000 on top of half of everything. It was probably $3 million total once everything was divided and sold. But the money wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the look on her face when she realized I wasn't the weak, insufficient man she'd thought I was. What mattered was standing up for myself for the first time in 15 years. After the verdict, I walked out of the courthouse into California sunshine. Catherine was beside me, smiling with satisfaction. You did good, Nathan, she said. Most people would have taken that settlement and lived with the bitterness. You fought back. My mother taught me to only use her gift when I had nothing left, I said. Turns out, having nothing left was exactly what I needed to find myself again. 6 months later, I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Riverside, the same coffee shop where I'd met Victoria 16 years ago. I was grading papers from my students, something I'd gone back to after the divorce was finalized. Teaching had always been my passion, not something I did because I couldn't do anything else, but something I chose because it mattered. A woman sat down at the table next to mine, struggling with a laptop that clearly wasn't cooperating. Without thinking, I reached over. The power button sticks sometimes. You have to hold it down for 5 seconds. She tried it and the laptop sprang to life. Thank you so much. I'm useless with technology. No problem. I'm Nathan. Caroline, she said, smiling. Are you a teacher? I looked down at the stack of essays I was grading. Guilty, high school English. That's amazing. My sister's a teacher. She says it's the hardest job she's ever loved. We talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing. She was a nurse at the local hospital, recently divorced, funny and kind and real in a way Victoria had never been. When we finally parted ways, she'd written her number on a napkin and told me to call her if I ever wanted to get coffee again. I folded that napkin carefully and put it in my wallet, right next to my mother's card. That night, I stood in my apartment looking out at the mountains, thinking about the journey from that motel room to here. The money my mother left me had saved my life, but it had also taught me something more valuable. Worth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the kindness you show, the work you do, the people you love. Victoria had taught me that lesson by trying to destroy me. My mother had reinforced it by giving me the means to rebuild. I still had most of the inheritance untouched, sitting in investments that would probably grow over time. I didn't need a mansion or expensive cars or Armani suits. I had enough to live comfortably, pursue my passions, and help others when they needed it, just like my mother had helped me. The divorce was final. Victoria had her money and her company and her success, and I had something better: my dignity, my peace, and a future that belonged entirely to me. My mother had been right. The money mattered most when I had nothing left, because having nothing was when I discovered everything I actually needed was already inside me. Thank you so much for watching this story. If it resonated with you, please hit that like button and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Have you ever had someone underestimate you, only to prove them wrong? I'd love to hear your stories. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories like this one. Your support means the world to me.